Welcome to webinar 39, one away from the big 40. We are talking about playing blind versus blind from the small blind versus someone you know or someone who knows you. So first of all, we need to talk about the definition of what that means. What does it mean when you know someone, or what does it mean when someone knows you? So let's write things. Of course, it depends on who it is. So I'll just write down everything you guys can come up with. Anything else? Okay. Maybe not according to you. Let's call that a personal relationship. No, that's an online relationship. Because it's this where you know someone online. Oh, I know Morton. Morton's a part of SNGP. Okay. There's this online relationship. Okay. Well, and we'll talk about how we physically change that later on. Let me ask you a question now. How do most people define knowing someone or they know you? Because even people who have said some of the things we've written here, I've heard you say specific things before. A lot of people do this, and me too. I even say this sometimes too. But what's the most common definition of, oh, he knows me, or I know him? Yeah, bingo. Bingo. And see, it's not a coincidence you both say the exact, this instantly, say the exact thing. It's like reg on reg, right? Oh, he knows me. Oh, he played, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the main focus we want to touch on today, but we will go deeper into things like this as well. Why is this definition important? Why is knowing someone a reg important? Oh, the Skype chat does not scroll down. He's played more than once. Okay, good. Because we can give him a range. So, played more than once. Maybe we can say experience. Assign him a certain range. Dynamic can adjust. We need to know how to adjust versus this person. Better reads, more stats. Okay. Now, first of all, there's a lot of these. I think there's a lot of flaws in these statements. So let's just start with a few, and not poking fun at anyone. Dynamic can adjust. How many regs just do the same thing over and over again without thinking? So maybe this isn't 100% true. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this note and I'm going to put that here. And we'll come back to that later. Um, another thing. If he is a reg, we should have good notes. How true is that? Do you guys have notes on like the 1,000 break-even regs who play these games? There's tons of different levels of regs and different levels of knowing, and that's what's important. Like, I think when you play a guy who's really good, you probably want to pick up a few notes. But think about it, depending on the game you're playing, notes don't make that much of a difference overall. Oh, I see. A note that he is a reg. Okay. You want to, I think if you were playing like 9-mans, notes become better because you encounter the same guy over and over again. If you're playing like 45s and 180s, it's less common to find yourself in a meaningful spot against the same guy. Another thing, how many people, yes or no, basically note when someone is a reg? Skype froze, but it came back. Okay. So how many people know? Sure. Basically, do you mark regs? Cyan tag. When you recognize the name. Sometimes we get a yes. This is something that Wicked Souls and I spoke about last week. Color codes. Okay. I don't know if this necessarily applies to everybody, but one really good piece of advice is this. So, before I say it, have you ever been in a game and been like, oh my god, there are so many regs. They're just everywhere. Or like, ever been in a game where you get in a 45-man, you're like, 20 of these guys are regulars. Or you get in a 9-man, 6 of these guys are regulars. I'm glad you say no. This is a very common thing that happens. A lot of people, especially like on 2+2, there's so many regs. Oh, the game's still beatable. And one of the things that can kind of lead to that confusion, this is like Wicked Souls. He sent me a picture and he goes, can I still beat these games? And he showed me a picture at the 10-20 blind level. It was one of the first hands. And he had 8 yellow circles around the table. How do you think that affects your mindset when you load up a game and you see 8 yellow circles that indicate regulars all at your table? Yeah, lowers confidence because it's like, oh my god, they're everywhere. And so Wicked Souls was saying, how can I beat this game? There's so many regulars. I just told him this. 2 things. 1, don't color code regulars unless they're really good. Because you don't need to follow around the break-even people who suck. Because all it's going to do is affect your confidence. Because once you label them the same color, you're effectively saying these people all have the same skill. Noting a bad reg is good because that's something that can raise your confidence. But the most important thing I told Wicked Souls was when you're at the 10-20 blind level, you can't make money. At 10-20, you can't do anything. It doesn't matter what you do. You can't win the game in the beginning. And the good part about that is because by the time you get to the final table, you're less likely to be surrounded by those guys. So Morton asks, so when would you give them a color code for a good reg? How would you define it? What criteria? I think the only people worth marking are the ones that are proven gigantic winners. In terms of saying, like, this guy is a good player. Now, if you use a different color to distinguish this guy is a reg, but he's not good, that's an okay note to have because that's something that's not going to destroy your confidence. Another thing about notes is you want to make sure that when you do take notes, that these are notes that can come in handy. And I would say, just from experience, over 90% of the notes that people take suck because they don't actually make a difference in future hands. You know, it doesn't matter if we see a guy who 4Xs with ace king and we write a note on that. Like, when is that going to happen again? You know, we need personality notes, right, that can then apply to almost every hand we play against that guy. Because we don't want to take, like, single notes. We want to take notes that apply to everything. So anyway, we're kind of getting off track a little bit, but this is important because we have to distinguish different levels of knowing. There's bad regs, and these are all the typical, boring, carbon copies of each other, and they're nothing fantastic at all. But then there's good ones. But remember, good, like Simicos, I'm sure you guys all know who that is, he's a really good reg. But he's a good reg who doesn't have time to think because he's too busy making money from being Supernova Elite and playing 50 games at a time, which is awesome for him. But you have to realize that when you're playing, there is a difference between good ones who play too much versus good ones who think. Big difference. Simicos is a great player, but he's great in his own type of style, where he's just trying to play as many games as possible, and he wins tons of money through rakeback, which is great. I'm not saying that's bad at all. I know a lot of people say, like, oh, you're a rakeback pro, and they make fun of that. I think it's incredible. I'd make all the money off of rakeback if I could. I don't care. Money's money. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Well, at least in a poker sense, I guess. So you want to be able to distinguish between the good ones who just play too much and do the same things over and over versus ones who actually change and, like someone said earlier, can be dynamic and can adjust. Any comments? Let's see. Before moving on, I just want to read what he says. If it ends up getting typed, maybe I'll come back to it. I'm going to read this. I would define it if people are adjusting, not even if he's making 30% ROI. Right, because someone can have, like, ROI, and I kind of said this in the book I wrote, a lot of people treat ROI as if it's like a ranking opponent index, where guys live at 30% and they go, oh my god. But what does that mean? You know, it's more important to watch who you're playing against instead of just being intimidated by whatever ROI they have. Cool. One time. Let's look at this comment. So his kind of notes are unknown reg, bad reg, tight call reg, weird reg, good reg. Now, I'll tell you, out of all of these, this is probably the best one. Now, like, if you can get that note on someone, that's really good. Like, if back in the day, if you were playing against me, you would probably see me doing some really stupid-looking things. And if you would just note me as being weird, that's a personality read that could actually help you versus me a lot. Because then when I do something weird in the future, you could be like, wait a minute, he's capable of doing weird stuff. So you can start possibly making some moves against me later on. Another good way of having a note, like, look at this personality right here, weird. Like, what about, like, someone who's normal or standard or doesn't think, not creative? Someone has their mic on, I think. So see, Marcus says, be careful at looking at overall stats. Looking for past year, for example, is way better. Well, right, and you also, when you look at a stat, what I didn't necessarily look at the past year, but I would just click on the image of the graph because I like to see the trends in people's winnings. You know what I mean? Like, was this a guy who, for example, I coached a guy once, and the moment I looked at a SharkScope graph, he had like a 40% ROI over like 10,000 games, and he was up like $30,000, and I was like, whoa, that might suggest this guy knows what he's doing. Well, then I clicked on his graph, and he won a $30,000 tournament, and then he broke even for a bunch of games. You know what I mean? So, like, the graph and the recent trends, like Marcus is saying the last year, you can determine that just from looking at the flow of the graph. You might come across a lot of guys who have gigantic swings up and down, but then when you look at... Oh, sorry. Thanks, Puyan. But when you look at the graph, you go, I get it now. When you look at the overall stats, they may look solid. So it's really important to see the trends of how someone arrived at their results. So with all that said... and exploit your friends every chance necessary. No, just kidding. With all that said, now let's jump into two hands, and let's think about not only do we know someone, which is the case, it's going to be the same opponent in both hands, but we want to think about everything basically. The biggest thing here is like when it's folded around, blind versus blind here. What do you do? Let's pretend that you know this guy. But now we've made a distinction that we don't know someone. A lot of people say they know someone, but really it's just reg on reg. Because this is the difference between acquaintances versus friends. And I don't mean this in a poker sense. I mean real life. Think about this. How many of you have acquaintances that you know? Probably all of you, I guess. Acquaintance is like someone you know, but you don't really know them. A Facebook friend, really good. So it's like, oh, I know John, but you don't really know him. You just know his name, and maybe you can guess how old he is. But you don't know him. And that's the difference between acquaintances and friends. Like, on Facebook, guys have, like Sanders said, like 800 friends who are acquaintances. But actual friends, not a lot. I mean, when you think about it, you guys are just all like, we're internet acquaintances, basically. Like, I don't know anything about you. And I'm talking about in a real life sense, not in a poker sense. I don't know anything about you. I know Morton likes Dexter. I can't even think of Morton's last name off the top. Larson. See, it's going to be a while, I think. Well, is that right? Like, I don't know your middle name. I don't know if you have animals. I don't know if you have brothers or sisters. All that kind of stuff, right? And the same thing is important in poker. You have to realize that just because you think you know someone, you don't know them. You're just acquaintances. And that's really, really important. So we already explained it, so I'll just do that. So this guy, essentially, even if you know him, he's just an acquaintance. You don't really know anything about him. And you have to recognize that. So I don't want to see any of this crazy overthinking stuff where you're like, oh, he knows that I know, that he knows that I know, and then you just keep going back and forth until your head explodes. Let's do this. I think there's two things that typical boring regs have in common. What are they? And there's probably more, but I think there's two main things. This is the big time number one. Big time number one. And this is easy. The raise fold? No, I doubt that. What about all those rules that say you can't raise fold with less than 20 big blinds in an MTT? Or you can't raise there with 15 big blinds in a sit and go? I think there's a second thing that's the most important. Shoving ATC is clearly the number one thing. Pretty much everybody does that. It's boring. It's easy. Everybody knows about it. There it is, right there. What do you mean by that, Morton? Can you be more specific? They have a static calling range. Can you be more specific? Well, most people don't adjust, but some people do. I mean, this is something that pretty much every reg has in common. Even you guys, mostly. And it's not like you're doing something bad by doing this. This is a good strategy. Well, right, playing by a chart, but not everybody does that. Most people don't adjust, that's true. How about this? Okay, here's Phil Helmet. He raises. What does a typical boring regular do in this spot? Bingo. And that's it right there. And now we need to obviously mention, we're talking about in spots where their stacks don't allow for it, but you'll see these all the time. Blind versus blind, a guy has somewhere around 10 big blinds or less, maybe he has 15 big blinds. Most regs won't flat, especially deeper in the game. So it becomes push or fold. And when you know that, you can really, really take advantage of these people, because whatever hand you have doesn't matter anymore. Because if you raise it, you're only raise folding, raise calling, or you just raise and he folds. See this? Yeah, it's like these generic kind of 10, 12, 13 big blinds. How many times have people made forum posts where they're like, I have 12 big blinds, I don't know what to do, it's such an awkward stack size. Like, people talk about that all the time. So that's really, really important when you're playing blind versus one of these guys. We talk about, okay, what should I do? So we want to make a big note, and I know we talked about this before, but it's worth mentioning again. Most regs don't flat call in a lot of these spots. Therefore, min raising becomes a huge tool for success instead of shoving. Okay? So here's what I would suggest, because, again, I don't want to make you do anything crazy, but shove hands that are safe and flop well. And we'll say good. This is because they have good semi-bluff value. Bluff hands that suck. Right, so you can shove 8-9, shove Jack-10, shove the ones that have good backup equity in case you're called. But hands like crappy ones, like Jack-Deuce, suited or not, just bluff it. And this is a really good way to play. Now, the question becomes, well, is he going to see through me? Is he going to figure out what I'm doing? Probably not. If he does, it's going to take a long time to do it. Or you may just run into a guy who his default play is to shove back here and exploit this. There are some guys like that. But one thing is pretty much 99% for sure, they're not going to flat. And you don't ever show your hand. Okay? Some guys will shove over you with really wide ranges here, but there's nothing you can do because you don't know yet. And even if he shoves and you fold, how do you know that he's exploiting you? You just know that he shoved. He easily had ace-king, the same probability that he has 7-deuce if he was, well, I guess if you have a 2, but if he was shoving ATC, ace-king and 7-deuce would be like the exact same odds. But how do you know he's going to shove at ATC? You don't. So for now, I would say just raise. Now, really quick, let's talk about guilty versus innocent. I've said this enough in coaching sessions. Someone explain this to me. There's 2 main points here. What are they? Really? What's that, let's see. That. Fill in those blanks. What's that saying? Right. Bingo. So the problem, people think that, not everybody, but a lot of people think that people are going to exploit them. Tons of people. I can't even explain to you how many people. Oh my god, I can't do this play. It's exploitable. And a long time ago, yeah, like Dexter evidence, a long time ago, I heard Barry Greenstein say something, and he said the best way to play is to play exploitable. But you play that way against someone who's not exploiting you. And then against the guy who would exploit that, you play in a different way versus them. And that never made sense to me. I was like, what the F is he talking about? I don't understand this. This was maybe like 5 years ago. But it makes so much sense. Because if you're playing exploitably and the person doesn't exploit you, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're playing exploitable. Exactly. So that's why you play this way. When you raise Jack-2 here, you do it against someone who's not exploiting you. And then if you start, a mic is on, if you somehow start to maybe later down the line, and it doesn't happen very often in 180s unless you're at the same table with that guy for a long time or something, and new stuff starts developing, like maybe 3-handed at the final table, then you can start adapting to that and changing. But the whole point is you're changing before him, so you always stay one step ahead of him. But for the most part, the most important thing is that they're innocent until proven guilty. In other words, they will not exploit you until you have Dexter evidence that they're exploiting you, or just a huge gut feeling because they've shoved on you 3 times in a row or something. But the problem is that most people in poker play with this idea of people are guilty until proven innocent. They assume that they're going to get exploited before they see anything. Exactly, and very good, because you might get re-shoved on. Marcus has a good point. You might get shoved on a few times by a guy, and they might be in just different games you're playing throughout the day or something. You can't just be like, oh, he's exploiting me. Maybe he just had ace-king. So my advice to you is this. Would you, in this situation right here, would you raise call ace? I'm just going to make this up. Would you raise call ace-8 offsuit for value? Would you raise call ace-5 for value? Oh, Puyan, because this is the correct way of thinking, smiley face. This is the incorrect way of thinking, sad face. So, just in case. Would anybody raise call ace-8, ace-5, king-10? Would anybody raise call this here? Anybody. Right? See, there you go. If a reg, then yes, this default assumption that people are going to reshove wide. And let's go up and see if I can find it. Let's see if I can find this. If I can find this, this will be great. There's a comment he made.
Control F.
I know, but if I do it, then it's going to go all the way back up to the top, I think. Or maybe it'll go backwards. Oh, that's good. Thanks. There it is. I think this is it. So we were talking about... maybe this doesn't relate, actually. But we were talking about things that you know regs do, and then he said this. So maybe that actually doesn't relate. But the thing is, just because a guy's a reg, look at the mistake you're making. That's like saying that you know what, like when you go and you see someone, you go, oh, I know about you. You're a white guy from California. I know about you. Like, you can't make assumptions about people. You're stereotyping. He's a reg, therefore raise calling ace-8 is better. How do you know that? Because that implies that he's shoving wide on you. How do you know he's shoving wide? You don't know that. The whole point I wanted to make about raise calling ace-8 and ace-5 is that if you're not willing to raise and beat that guy to the pot snap calling, he's probably not shoving as wide as you think he is. Well, right, you got to think something. You're right. But you want to make sure that you're not just stereotyping. You want to make sure that you're... I mean, these things right here, these are like just trends. This is like what everybody does. But not everybody reshoves here. You don't know that they're doing that wide. You need evidence before that. But let's say, don't stereotype. Okay. Yeah, it happens. Puyan knows about people who do that kind of stuff. Okay, let's see what happened in this hand. He reshoved. What does that mean? He's exploiting you. It is. It is hard to find evidence. That's why we're probably not going to have any here. That's just the reality of playing a lot of tables. But the evidence you're going to need to find comes from final tables. But why that's cool and works out nicely is because you don't necessarily earn money when you're at big blind 1600. You earn money when you're at big blind 6000. and 8,000 and 10,000. This is a great raise fold. So I think if you want to balance it, you can shove the hands that do well and bluff the hands that don't do well. How do you know that? Oh, I see. Okay, cool. Sarcasm is hard to detect on Skype. Okay. So now we want to look at the last hand. Here we go, 136, which is down here. Here we go, look, it happens to be the same guy. It folds around to us. What should hero do? Remember what happened last time. Okay, so we get a shove. Shove because button is dead. Same thing. There's no other answer. Morton would limp. Oh, Puyan, what do you mean? In this spot he has a lot more leverage. $4K button. Well, here's a problem right here. You don't have to do anything. You could, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but you could open fold here and it's fine. You could open fold aces here. What if your internet disconnected and you folded aces? You'd still have a great shot at winning the game. You don't have to do anything. Especially math. Screw math. Raise and decide. Let's be realistic. A bunch of people said shove. For those of you who would raise, how many people would raise call? I guess maybe that's a bad question for Skype. Who would raise call and who would raise fold for those of you who would raise? Okay, 3 folds, 4 folds. Puyan's got a good point. He has to be reshoving better. Now, of course, we don't know for sure. However, some good evidence to suggest that he would be tight here because that guy has 4,500. The thing is that I totally just had brain fart. What was I going to say? But you don't have to shove here to have a lot of leverage on this guy. Poker says you have to shove here to have a lot of leverage on that guy. Common sense tells you that you could just min raise. Or you could just limp and bet the flop. That's true, he might fold 7-7 and maybe reshoves that to a min raise. How often does that happen? Six, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9, 9. 2% of the time? 3% of the time? Does anybody care about doing something different because of what happened last time? Like what? So limp. How do you know that last time even existed in this guy's mind? How do you know he remembers that? Mark says, too much credit. How do you know last time he didn't actually have a hand? Good. Yeah, what if he just had ace-king? I don't want to jinx it, but my internet's doing great. I'm interested in what he's going to say. Well, if Phil raised, easy shove. Because a good note to have on Phil would be like, he's weird. But of course, I have more information on him because I talk to him a bunch, you know. Well, I wouldn't say never. What if moving up to the next spot was $197,000? We know how important that number is. I mean, but you're right. For the most part, realistically, in the games that you guys are playing, probably not folding. Right, Puyan's got a really good point. And think about it, go even beyond that, Puyan. Let's make it sound even better to raise fold. If you raise fold, you're only losing 7,500. You only go down to 93,000. You still have a 20 times chip lead on the short stack. Because that's all common sense stuff. What Puyan's doing is he's looking at with a realistic outcome of making the play. Instead of most players, not just saying you guys, but pretty much everyone, is looking at, is this correct? Is this not correct? Is this plus EV? Is it negative EV? Forget that stuff. Think about the obvious things that are true. Kind of like how in the previous webinar we talked about perfect and imperfect information. Perfect information says if you raise fold, you will have 93,000. Imperfect information is this plus EV or not plus EV? I definitely wouldn't shove here. And Mark's got it. There's no EV because you're probably not going to get a spot like this again. This is its own unique spot. Shoving here is a disaster waiting to happen. There's no need to shove. And there's a lot of regs where if that guy had 50K in the big blind, they'd shove ATC. Wouldn't even think about it. Wouldn't even care that half their stack is on the line. This is a spot to min raise and fold, and I mean with anything. Deuce 3, 7 deuce, they're all the same. Especially if he's not flat call. Or, like Morton said, to limp. Now, if you had a hand like nines, the question becomes what's better with nines? That's fine, you're totally allowed to disagree. With nines, well, you're going to get called by tens, jacks, queens, kings, aces. Maybe nines is just a bluff, too. Well, right, but then this is that guy we talked about earlier. This guy is one of those guys who's probably not flatting. And this is just from Phil Helmet's information on this guy. But people do flat, and that's okay, though, because I'm okay with if they flat, because if they flat, there's 20K in the pot, and there's still huge leverage because that guy's short. I mean, I would love the guy to fold, but if he flatted, I almost don't even care. Because I could still get that guy to fold. This is a good point. Because if we're raise folding because someone is so tight, then 9-9 would be probably just a bluff, too. Well, and if you want to simplify it, you can open shove a hand like nines or a hand that runs really good. But please don't ever shove a really bad hand. Well, right, but the whole point is, Sander, even though a shove is okay with nines because you could be flipping a bunch of the time when he calls you with 16 combos of ace king and ace queen and stuff like that, the point is that by raising, you have a 0% chance of blowing 40% of your stack. By shoving, there is some chance greater than 0 that you will blow 40% of your stack. Not saying that it's bad to shove ATC here. It's not. You're gonna make EV or whatever that is. But the whole point is like Mark was saying, there's no expected value for a hand that doesn't occur very many times. So really what matters is the actual outcome of this hand. You can't blow this hand. Because if you blow it, that's it. It's a one-time event. It's over. So by min-raising, and this is what I did when I was playing, I would always min-raise and fold tons of hands here if they shove. Because I have absolutely 0% chance of going from 100K to 60K. I have a 0% chance. When you shove, even if it's something small like a 5% chance of that happening, it's still greater than 0. And what happens is if you do enough similar plays like this over time, where it's like a little tiny chance that you blow it, a little tiny chance that you blow it again, eventually it bites you in the ass. And that's the game that you blow. How many of you guys have ever been deep at a final table and you're doing really well and the game just unravels and you blow it? Come on, it's happened to everybody here. So what this play ensures is that you can't blow it. That's the whole point of making this play. It doesn't mean shoving is bad, it just means that it gives you a slight chance that you blow the game. Or at least begin to blow the game. If you want to simplify it and just shove nines, I think that's totally fine. Because it's simple, it's straightforward, and it's obviously it's pocket nines. Yes. The thing is every situation, especially deep, becomes unique. So with this one big blind in play, that's what makes this hand unique. Now, change the situation. Let's just make the one big blind guy have 45,000. Totally different. If you want to shove, it's better. But at the same time, I probably still wouldn't shove because I have a really nice stack I want to preserve. And that's fine. You can say that's worse. That's all we want here is I don't really care about the physical decision you make. I care about how you think about it and how you interpret it, because that's going to teach you for every hand you ever play. Not just like, what do you do specifically with Jack 5, specifically blind versus blind or something like that. It could be worse. I could see that. Because now with that guy 45K, then if you lose, you fall right back into the pack. Well, I mean, the whole thing is if you think well, you can do anything. If you play well, you're only limited to the plays that you know how to do. And that was like in my 2+2 coaching thing. Some guy asked me, he's like, how can you be a good coach if you haven't played in a year and a half? Games change. And so I just told him, play changes, but thinking doesn't change. Because if you know how to think, you can adapt to anything. So 10 years from now, when people are like, oh my god, games really aren't beatable on PokerStars. As long as you know how to think, you can always stay ahead. So in this hand, I guess I'd end up min-raising and folding. Because I would assume if someone does shove back here, they're probably really tight. I would give no influence by the previous hand where we saw that guy reshove. Because that was about 50 hands ago, and I don't even know if that guy remembers it, and maybe he just had a good hand last time. But the whole point of this is, when you know someone blind versus blind, if I had to sum it up, don't overthink. Just think for yourself. Don't overthink, just think. You know, you can start, a lot of small raises are good because a lot of these regular guys don't flat, and you really want to take advantage of that. Now, if you started to shove on me all the time, I'd start raise calling wider. So now, like, if I could, if I go back to this hand, and let's say I knew that you were shoving wide, I would take a hand like Ace-8 offsuit here, and I would raise it with and anticipate calling you, because I probably get more value by doing that. I would take a hand like King-10 suited, and I would raise call you, because that's how you adjust to someone who's shoving the crap out of you. And I would actually, if I had a bad hand, like in a situation like this, I would either shove to prevent you from reshoving, Or if you called wide two, I would just fold. And I'd just say, here you go. If I was allowed to play. Very good point, Marcus. This would probably take a whole lot of hand history to happen, and it usually never happens. I would say the only time this happens is when you're stuck at the same final table with someone and you're like in a shorthanded situation where you keep getting the same situation over and over and over again, and there's this history of like 4, 5, 6 hands in a row where something's going on. Then you can be like, whoa, okay, I get it now. Usually like in these, when you're playing 180s and you're just like early game, middle of the game, whatever, you're not even at the same table with a guy for that long and having a lot of the same situations, because most of the time it's full table stuff. So you think about it, blind versus blind is only going to occur every 9 hands versus that guy. So you're probably not ever going to develop that type of relationship. But what you really want to be careful of is never thinking, I know that guy. I've seen him on Sharkscope. Therefore, I know him. Because that's the same way as like when people see their favorite celebrity on the street. Like Morton's going to go to LA pretty soon, and he's probably going to see a celebrity. And Morton shouldn't be coming back and going, oh my God, I know that guy. No, you don't. You know what I mean? Like you just saw him and you recognize him, but you don't know him. And that's the biggest thing that you want to think about in these hands, blind versus blind. Just because you know someone doesn't mean you know someone. Okay, so when it comes down to it, they're pretty much the same as everybody else, except they're probably not going to flat call you. And maybe you can just keep an extra eye out on them just in case. But not very much is going to change. You might not want to, one piece of advice I can give you is don't shove wide into typical regs, because they will probably be more likely to just call you off with a king 5 because it's, quote, this standard, quote unquote. You want to be careful of that. So like, let's say for example that I was going to shove jack deuce against this guy. I wouldn't physically shove. I would make it like 5200 and at least make that guy, I'd force him to have to raise me, which would probably change his range to be tighter. So if like, let's sum up what to do. Don't shove wide into typical regs. Limp and bet a lot versus typical regs unless they shove on you, and if they do, start limping. Good hands to call. Min raise a lot versus them because they don't flat. If they begin to reshove, just start raise calling wider. If all else fails, just walk them. I don't know. So that will do it. Any final questions about anything? The whole point is this, and also keep this in mind too. Just because there is a reg at your table, it doesn't mean anything. Because you make your money, or your PokerStars money, at final tables. It's only at who's at your final table that counts. And what's cool about 180s is that there's a lot of regs, but then when you get down to the final table, there's maybe one other guy, maybe 2 other guys. Very rarely you'll see more than that. But then even when you do, remember, most of them are not that good. Because like we said before, there's a difference between these carbon copy regs, and there's good ones who play too much, and there's good ones who think. Yeah, never assume anything. Just because you know someone doesn't mean you know them. I don't know what you mean by that. You can have personal decisions too. I think when you're playing against against someone, you always want to allow yourself to do your own things that you think are best in a situation. You don't always want to just exactly listen to what I'm saying. You want to take this information and develop your own strategy from it. Because you want to make sure that when you're playing, it's natural and that you're not trying to like regurgitate what I'm teaching. You want to be able to take the advice and morph it into your own personality. Morton says, if Puna was in the big blind in these hand histories and Helmet was in the small blind, how should that influence both ranges as we are online friends? Well, you should walk each other so you guys are both in the game still. Or if you like to piss your friends off. I mean, honestly, like for me personally, like if I were to play against you guys, I would literally just walk you a bunch because my personality is like I don't like effing with my friends basically. But not everybody's like that. There's a lot of guys who like battling their friends, and that's totally fine, so do whatever feels right to you. I would say if there's two of you in single protege, you should walk each other because the only person who loses is me. So please don't do that. But besides that, have fun. I don't think I've played Aaron in poker in like 3 years, so I have no idea. But yeah, back a long time ago, that was pretty crazy. He was really good. Yeah, I avoided him and sitting in the 9-mans, because I would just load after him. But I mean, 9-mans, they get to the point where there's so many people playing that you can't wait because you lose more value by waiting to load than you do to just play. Like, is it better to have $0 an hour or like half your money per hour? Yeah, end of webinar. Okay. Seems good. Good. So hope you learned. So in other words, don't be freaked out just because you know someone or something like that, or don't let that get in your head. Just keep it easy. Stay simple, because most people aren't even thinking what you're thinking. So just as long as you don't overthink and you think for yourself, you'll be fine. Don't be intimidated. And seriously, if you do have a bunch of yellow circles around regulars, take them off. Stop freaking yourself out. Or, I don't know. I like what SRV does, where he marks bad regs. I think that's okay because that raises your confidence. Okay, that's it.